So it is August 9th, 2022, and I wanted to share progress on the build stringers here, cutting the notches into those. As you can see here, I got more lumber, 2x4s, sometimes of kind of questionable quality. Be a lot of pieces here I probably don't use. I have to cut out on these, but anyway, I'm not sure where I left you before, but I've got a couple 20-foot 2x4s that I ripped, resawed down to 5/8 and planed them down to 5/8 of an inch. That gives me the line that I need along here, and I use my circular saw to cut a couple of grooves. And you can see one here, there's a groove, and then on the inside, of course, too, there's that groove, and it cuts it to the proper depth that the 2x4 needs to sit in there. Now the problem is, and then I take that off, the problem is getting that notch in there. As you can see, I got them cut forward of this point. Getting that notch cut in there, how do you go about that? Well, I started out, like I said, after I got it cut with my small circular saw, and this one is set to the proper depth, and I have a little fence on here that runs on either side of that tube. Run it on one side, then flip it over and run it on the other side, and then that cuts it to the proper depth, and it cuts it right alongside the 2x4, and that works fine. Well, so then what I started doing was taking my other little circular saw and hacking out the stuff inside here, you know, just cutting, you know, like you normally do, cutting strips out and then knocking it out and then trying to clean it up. But the problem with that is holding that saw underneath here, and you got to take the 1x4 down to do this, of course. Then you don't have a real guide on like this end. And so you wind up cutting this deeper because it's hard to hold it just at the perfect angle that you need it to. Which isn't that big a deal because we don't need this to be perfect anyway, and this will get filled up with thickened epoxy. But you can see here I really hacked up some of these. They aren't very good. So what I did was, hello Pee-wee. Hey buddy, how you doing? Yeah, you need attention, don't you? And I also, because these are kind of rough, what I did was I ordered one of those little finish sanders, those little 1/2-inch belt sanders, you know, that stick out 10 inches or whatever. I can get that up in here and sand on these surfaces, you know, to finish them off. But, I mean, it works, but it's a lot of work. It's physically a lot of work to hold that saw upside down and then cut through there. And then trying to hold it at the proper angle isn't a lot of fun. But you can see I got these, you know, pretty close. And then however these wind up laying, once the 2x4 is run along this length, then any of these gaps, like here, are going to get filled with thickened epoxy. So that's not the end of the world. But it's still not easy to do. I tried using a router, and I was doing some test runs over here. You can see on this piece of wood here, I got a bunch of different test runs under here to notch it out, and then here was a router attempt. You know, and the router really wasn't, and I was using my small router because my big router to hold that upside down and try to run that, that was going to be exhausting too. So yeah, this was the regular notching, and this, you know, worked all right, using the small saw to notch when it was just the 2 sets of 2x4s. Now the problem is, especially on this first one, I've got a little more than just the 2x4s to go through. I got this floor beam to go through also. But not only that, and then when I got down in here, I also, in cases, had to go through this support for the water tanks, which is just lovely. Anyway, so in the end, what actually worked better, and what I was doing down here now, and you can see these actually look better too. You know, they're cut out smoother and whatnot. But what I was doing was I was just, you know, I had these first two cuts here in, and then I was using my, oh, where is it? Down here? Yeah, way over here. I was using my multi-tool, my oscillating multi-tool, with a fairly aggressive blade on it. And yeah, it's not always entirely possible to keep the blade cutting, you know, at the perfect angle. But again, we really don't need that, because with the thickened epoxy, once you get the 2x4 that's going to be let in there, it's going to curve around the way it needs to, and then you can fill up any gaps with the thickened epoxy. Like George said, epoxy is the wood butcher's best friend, and it's exactly right. It'll cover up a lot of sins. Now, thing is, I've got a cordless one too, and I had the exact same blade on my DeWalt here, and it I don't know how well you're gonna be able to see that. It sucked. It would not cut. And I noticed that earlier, that I didn't think when I was doing like the notching out the rabbet for the bow here. I noticed it didn't seem like it was cutting as well as I had experienced with this saw earlier in its life. And I think this one has a little bit wider throw. I think it's moving a little farther, you know, back and forth. And that must be why it works so much better. I don't know. It's not that this DeWalt doesn't work. It's just not nearly as effective at cutting through wood as that Rockwell is, the corded Rockwell. So I've been using that Rockwell to notch these out, and it's working fairly well. But that said, yeah, this is going to take a long time. Now this first one, like I said, is by far the worst, because not only is it cutting a lot more material, because I got all of these floors to cut through, but it's also closest under the boat. As I get farther out here, it's going to get significantly easier to, you know, to work, rather than dancing down around there trying to sit. In fact, those 4x6s there, I was dragging along as a seat to work on while I was under there. As you get higher, it's going to get easier, and as you get farther away from the keel, it's going to get easier. So this is, you know, this is the only one I think that's going to have the, well, I guess I'll have them up here later, but for the most part, that's the only piece that's going to need to be cut into those floors. We'll have a couple of them to do up here, but once we get a little farther, we'll be out of those probably too. And then, of course, once you get up here, you're going to have, you know, you're going to have more to cut through, because you're going to have to cut out these 2x4s, or these 3/4 pieces of plywood also. But yeah, that won't be so bad. But yeah, so I don't know what the best way to do this is. I tried thinking, you know, making jigs, and, you know, even making a dado head of some sort that I could, you know, put on some sort of tool. And I looked at angle grinder attachments. I tried using my Arbortech, my gouging blade, which, you know, can run into like this. And of course, this takes material out pretty quickly. But again, boy, you just, if it bounces just a little bit, or, you know, you push just a little bit too hard, or it hits a knot and grabs a little bit, and then you got a 1/2-inch hole cut into something where you didn't want it. So I'm not that talented at artistic at carving that something like that's really going to work for me. So I'm back to something else. And again, that's maybe not the best way of doing it, but using these oscillating multi-tools seems like it's going to be the best bet, and it's going to take a while. I was thinking, oh, I can probably put one of these on a day, and yeah, it's probably going to take, I'll be lucky if I get 2 of them on a week. And that's when it's not too hot to work, because it's going to get hot again here now shortly. But So yeah, now this one that I'm working on here, if I can get the rest of this notched out, like today and tonight, I'll be happy. And then tomorrow my little sander's supposed to come in, so then I can probably sand it and start installing the first build stringer. But anyway, so that's the struggle that I've gone through trying to figure out how to get these notched. And I'm to a point where I'm just gonna go with what's working the best for me now and hope for the best.